Welcome back here with you on Birds 365, McMullen and McDonald. We are joined by one of our faves from NFL.com, Eric Edholm. Eric, good to see you. Appreciate you jumping on with us this morning. 1 week. 1 week until the first game in the National Football League. That would be the Kansas City Chiefs against the Detroit Lions on Thursday night. So what do you do for the next week?
Well, tonight I watch Mizzou, South Dakota, of course, because everybody else will be. I get my alma mater tonight, and then just settle in for a weekend of college football and catch up on some writing, and then do whatever I can to stay busy until Thursday around 7:00 Central Time.
You know, it's funny you talked about college football. I was watching Notre Dame Navy last week from Dublin, and I'm like, this is too early. This is too early. This is a little bit too early. I'm like, I can't get into it yet, but hopefully this week we'll get the feel, a little bit better feel for college football.
No, see, I was watching USC because the freshman kid, mackerel.
Yeah.
I need him on the Eagles because he's a generated touch guy, and John hates that. He hates the
I don't hate it. I just think to clarify, Eric, with manufactured touch players, I don't think enough coaches take advantage of them. I don't think there's enough coaches that stay disciplined enough, not named Kyle Shanahan, where I'm like, everybody talks about it. And then when the bullets are getting fired, they're like, I can't worry about that. I got to run a route. I got to run a play.
Right. I think there's something to that. Yeah, I've always wondered about those players. Just like, we were kind of having a debate last week or whatever when Isaiah Simmons, kind of the idea of like the defensive weapon, right? And they become you have too many unitaskers or too many specialists that are so good at what they do that having these gadget players, can be dangerous if they're not used properly and they're not developed properly too. We say, you can do a million different things, but if he does them at just an above average or slightly average, or slightly above average or average way, I don't know what you're getting out of it. But you're right about the play calling too. You see it a lot in the scripted plays early in games, but when it comes down to right,
and then once the scripted part is over, you got to be really, really disciplined. I got to get so and so involved. I was a big Cordero Patterson guy when he came in the league. And, Minnesota like every once in a while, and then they forgot about getting, we got to get this guy to football. Whereas somebody can run a route like Justin Jefferson. It's easy to get them to football. But if you got to manufacture it, other than Kyle, I haven't seen a lot of people successful with that.
Yeah, you have to have a coach who's got, some breadth to their thought, and you have to have somebody who has plays that set up other plays. And, you're not just calling plays, you're calling plays for a specific purpose, right? And to be able to handle that, manage the clock and manage the game and also spread the touches out carefully and thoughtfully. It's a tough job. You're right. Shanahan does a pretty darn good job of it, right? There's no team out there that has more of those specialist type guys probably than the Niners. And for the most part, they use them.
Yeah. Shanahan's the best. It's not even close. I had not even realized this. Shame on me. You set me up for an easy first question, Mr. Missouri guy. Eagles acquired a tight end.
Albert O. That's right.
Whose last name we're still learning how to pronounce. I had draft guys say he could be the steal of the draft prior to, and most talented tight end in the draft, and he hasn't lived up to that. Now, he didn't go in the first round. It's not like he's a bust or anything, but there was some that talked him up more than what his production has been his first 3 years in the league. I'm sure you followed him because he's one of your guys, former Tiger. Why didn't he have bust out seasons in Denver, and what could the Eagles be acquiring?
Fascinating specimen. He's kind of a large finesse tight end, and that's the best way I can kind of describe him. I mean, his final year at Missouri, they didn't get him the ball enough. The year prior, he had a really productive season and felt like kind of a guy who almost demanded the ball in crunch time, but way too passive, I thought, as a player. Just sort of felt like, just seemed like a guy with a real kind of even temperament and didn't really have that, that kind of extra gear, that little extra nastiness. He was big enough. You thought he had potential as a blocker, but leverage, strength, things like that. I'm talking about kind of earlier in his career, especially coming out of college. It just felt like he wasn't developed in those ways. So talking about a specialist, he essentially started his career as a number 3 tight end, the kind of guy that you could throw the ball to, but didn't have a whole lot of special teams utility, didn't have a blocking role, couldn't be used extensively, suffered from the occasional concentration drop. So it was frustrating to watch him. Injuries also were a big factor early in his career. But if you watched any of that fourth quarter the other night, I mean, he's out there making diving catches, unbelievable grabs, and you think
Howie Roseman
he's still got talent. Yeah.
But by the way, Howie and Nick here, Eric, they spent the whole summer saying, we value joint practices, preseason games, don't even pay attention. Then they trade for Albert Okwuegbunam. Like, did you see that preseason game? I'm like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. I mean, I see how that's how they would justify it, right? Even Sean Payton seemed a little caught off guard. Like, where's this been all, They obviously have Greg Dulcich and other guys they drafted a little higher more recently. But, I mean, it just is – I don't know what role he's going to fill. I know they were trying to figure that third tight end spot out a little bit and whether it was going to be a receiver, blocker, or kind of a combination. But, like I said, he's always had ability. I've always thought he could be a really good red zone threat because of his high point ability and his – just unusual skills.
And you run in the 4.4s. I mean, people are going to say, all right, maybe I can fix this guy.
He's just not agile. He's not a quick twitch guy, but he can run and he's big, like you said. Yep.
Yeah. So, I think it was a valuable take a shot as a third tight end. Think it's an upgrade over Brant Calcaterra. Eric, I want to throw my waiver theory at you. Waivers.
Okay.
It's such an interesting psychological experiment to me. I've talked about this with Jody. Every year, I think the average over the past 10 years has been about 40 guys over that first week get claimed on waivers. But every year, especially here in Philadelphia, because the Eagles have been one of the deeper teams in football, a lot of fans go, they're going to lose this guy. They're going to lose this guy. They're going to lose this guy. And it ends up never really manifesting itself. But 365 days later, same thing. We're going to lose this guy. We're going to lose this guy. Now, my theory is if you claim 1, that's fine. If you claim 2, it's fine because there's some guys like Howie, typically, there's some GMs that just like to do something. They don't want to stand still. They want to keep doing stuff. But if you claim 3 or more, you stink. And you're either a disaster or you're rebooting off a disaster. So this year, 24 guys got claimed, 6 by Arizona. Eagles fans will get excited by that because Jonathan Gannon, they don't like. 3, Indianapolis and Carolina, our other buddy, Shane Steichen, and the Panthers, they stink, right? Those teams stink. Have you ever thought about it that way?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think about I remember I think about the draft sometimes in terms of what pro personnel guys look for. I always ask the pro scouts that I've talked to, I always say what are the hardest positions to find in season? What are the positions where you can get bargains at free agency, right? And how does that correlate to the draft? Well, this all comes back to cut down day because, you have all year to assemble this 90-man roster. There are some teams like the Eagles, like the Ravens, even the Patriots, 49ers, a handful of others that every single year have players cut that end up on other teams, either because those teams have produced GMs and assistant coaches who came from there, or because they recognize that bottom of the roster talent is a little bit more robust than what you'd find in Arizona, Carolina, et cetera. Obviously some teams get bit by injuries, and if it's like a punter or a long snapper, some kind of specialist like that, you get it. Maybe a kick returner, somebody with real specific skills, a slot receiver, a nickel corner. But yeah, I mean, if you're doing what Arizona's doing, it's clearly you're panning for any kind of goal whatsoever. I said this past draft should be about getting as many foundational pieces as possible. heading into a draft where you're going to take a couple big cuts at superstars.
All right, Eric, got to ask you about Jonathan Taylor. Of course, he's a topic of conversation here in Philadelphia because anytime a big name becomes available, it's got to be, and the Eagles are involved, because how he checks in just to see, hey, what's the price? And the reports that we got yesterday, the price was Jalen Waddle plus. Yeah, the Colts are really trying to trade him. Good luck with that. It's just seemed like there's too much bad blood gone back and forth between these two groups. But if they're holding tight to their asking price and they're not getting that, what's going to happen 4 weeks from now? He's on the PUP list, and you can just table everything for 4 weeks. But at some point, it's going to come to a head. Can he come back and play for them? Is there too much bad blood? Is the owner dictating everything here? What's going to happen with Jonathan Taylor a month from now in Indianapolis?
Yeah, as you kind of laid out, there are a lot of little tentacles to this thing. There's an injury. There's a contract situation. There's the fact that this team was pathetically bad last year. There's no other way to say it, right? I mean, the whole mess with Jeff Saturday, moving on from a respected head coach, even one who was probably not for long anyway, in Frank Reich. You're bringing in a rookie quarterback that you hope Taylor will be kind of the bodyguard, if you will, somebody who can obviously help kind of take some of the pressure off of Anthony Richardson. So, there's all these different tentacles. Shane wanted to make this thing, get this thing done like everybody else did. But, Jonathan's held firm to a high number. The Colts have said, no, we can't pay you that. And they reluctantly granted the trade. Now that always opens Pandora's box a little bit, and you get worried about, well, how do you sort of put the genie back in the bottle on this one, right? How do you make amends? And I mean, I've seen some strange things. I've seen players and teams that look like they're at complete loggerheads. They'll never come back from this. And all of a sudden, a new deal signed, everything's fine, right? I mean, Is that the way it always works out? No. But remember how weird and intense it got with Kyler and the Cardinals before his contract?
Yeah.
There were a few other examples too. I mean, if you want to go all the way back to Emmitt Smith sitting out the first 2 games in '93 or whatever, I mean, Emmitt worked that out all right, and with the Cowboys. So I've been told that there's frustration on both sides, but that the Colts still think this thing is solvable and fixable. And Chris Ballard is, I think, going to try to make this work as best he can. And I wouldn't be shocked if they kind of hold on to him and hope that Taylor, kind of sees their side of it. But
I was listening to Chris Ballard. It's amazing how quickly this league moves, Eric, because, a couple of years ago, Chris was the toast of the town. He was one of the best GMs in football. And as you mentioned, Indianapolis has not had the best run. And boy, he's out there. He made that one quote about Jonathan Taylor, basically was like, he's a great player. He said all the right things, great player. We won him, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, we won 4 games last year, essentially saying, you can have the best running back in football, and we stunk. I don't know if that's the way I would have handled it, but is it Chris Ballard or is it the owner in Indianapolis? I got to believe it's the owner. And I feel bad for my guy, Shane Steichen.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, Shane's obviously, I would say a lot of people remember a year ago, which I had forgotten until recently. We were looking at our 2022 season predictions and looking at other people's too, kind of having fun with it. Oh, who screwed up? Who did the best? There was some Indianapolis love before last year. Oh, yeah. There were people actually saying like, hey, Matt Ryan's the perfect quarterback for this team. They've got kind of a veteran core, the offensive line, Jonathan Taylor, exactly. I mean, and look how far they fall. Now, maybe that suggests that they're actually a little bit better than we realized, that last year was just kind of a fluky sort of a torrent of events. But, there always seems to be some drama going on around this team in central Indiana, right? A team that isn't exactly in the media hotspot, right? And, he's a flamboyant owner. He's a guy who is obviously not afraid to kind of say what's on his mind and be a little bit contrarian from the rest of the owners and, wave his freak flag the way he could only do. And there are some people who feel like that's kind of a cover for the fact that boy, I mean, he's made some rash decisions. He's made some poor ones. He's been the guy who's hired all these people that are now, many of them gone. At some point you have to, the buck has to stop somewhere. So I think it's the blame is spread throughout, but there's been one common denominator since the team got there,
Yeah.
Give me your read on how good a deal or not good a deal it was that the Cowboys made getting Trey Lance to be their backup.
Pretty interesting, isn't it?
Really is.
Yeah.
And I've given my take on it. I need yours. How did it shake out, and how much do you think the Cowboys benefit from it?
I have a lot of respect for Will McClay and the Cowboys scouting staff. I think they're among the best. It's really hard to grade these things. Everyone has whiffs. Everybody, has hits. But when I listed earlier, the number of teams that had, the Ravens and the Eagles, et cetera, Cowboys probably deserve to be on that list. They have a lot of talented players, and they had some tough cuts this year. So they know talent. They've got a high-priced scouting staff that I think has earned the money. They're going to be a team that's to be reckoned with. So I think they're just looking at it as they had a big grade on Trey coming out and felt like, boy, is this the kind of thing that we can afford to pass on for a fourth-round pick, fourth-rounder, for quarterback? You assume that's a backup with maybe some growth potential. Day 1 or 2, you say, okay, prospective starter, right? But day 3 and beyond, round 4 and beyond, you're taking a little bit of a risk. And they clearly thought he had talent and was shoehorned into this very awkward quarterback situation with a coach who's always had wandering eyes at that position, right? Tom Brady, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford. Shanahan's been connected to every quarterback who's ever lived, I think. And that's tough. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know that you take a kid with 800 reps under center that matter since high school. He doesn't, he's just so raw that I think given where Dak's contract has a void after 2 more years. So that's behind the scenes when you could watch him develop and be the backup possible starter one day. You never know.
It's interesting you guys bring up the Cowboys for Lance, and you mentioned obviously this is not going to be popular in Philadelphia, but over the cap, I just saw an interesting stat. They went down the rosters, the initial 53s. The team responsible for starting the most NFL careers.
I just saw that, yeah.
The Dallas Cowboys. And
I'm telling you.
Baltimore's number 2, which people will say, yeah, that makes sense. But the Cowboys, they identify talent. They've been a talented team pretty consistently here. They just tend to implode in the playoffs. But they found a lot of good players over the years. That's fair to say. At
the risk of further alienating any of your fans, like I said earlier, I think they're going to be good this year. No worries. We break through it. Yeah.
The mill here, Eric. No problems whatsoever.
I just speak my mind and hope it comes out all right. I mean, I think they're going to be one of the Super Bowl contenders this year. I don't know if they can win it. As you said, their recent playoff record. I keep saying it about the Chargers, which I don't know if that gives me any credibility or not. But, if you just look at talent, you say to yourself, the Chargers should be good this year. The Cowboys should be good this year. I think both teams have good scouting staffs, and that matters. I think the Eagles have a good scouting staff, and they've made some changes in recent years too. But, I'm a draft guy. I'm always going to kind of stand up for that community, and I believe that for as many misses as every staff has, you pay these guys to find the 6th rounders, 7th rounders, undrafted free agents, kind of those gems, those diamonds in the rough. Everyone can identify a first-round talent, but that's how you get to be Dallas, opening the most careers in of the current NFL players, because you know who can make it, and that's knowing what that floor is. I think is really important.
You've got the Chargers and your Cowboys in your – don't discount them. They could end up in the big game group. I'll tell you who I have in there, and I need your take on them. I think the Seahawks could be that team this year. And the Eagles play Seattle in season. Yeah. I think a really nice test for them. I think Bobby Wagner back. I know he's old, but he still was pretty damn good for the Rams. The Rams were awful last year. Wagner was one of the highlights of their entire team. And then you get Adams back, which is a piece, to use one of those pieces. How do you use them? You got to use them correctly. A blitzing defensive back. There aren't too many of those in the National Football League, but Jamal Adams might be the best one of all of them. Do you think Seattle's a team that can win 10 or 11 games?
Well, first of all, I've been in Seattle for a Eagles-Seahawks game, and that was a fun night. It was a primetime game. It was terrific. I got there early. The streets were filled. If you guys get a chance to go, obviously, I don't know if you have been out there for a game. That is a environment. So, that's a fun one. Seattle, I agree. I think I kind of slept on them even earlier this summer. Like, they had a nice little season, and, Gino's back, and everything's great and everything. I kind of just put them to the side a little bit. And then all of a sudden I'm realizing, boy, the Rams look pretty tough this year. I mean, rough, not good. The Cardinals, we know.
Really
49ers, right, exactly. Who's to say this is a team that added Jackson Smith and Jigba. They added Devin Witherspoon to an already pretty talented secondary. You get Adams back. You bring Wagner back, right? And then all of a sudden you start thinking, run defense was their biggest problem a year ago. Not having enough playmakers at the end of the year was another issue. Kind of just solved both of those right there in the draft and also with some of their other moves they made. And, I mean, who's to say they couldn't win 11, 12 games, right? I mean, it's probably not going to look perfect every single time. We'll see just how good that defense is, but they seem to have kind of fixed some things that look like, thorns last season during a very good campaign otherwise.
Eric, one of your most interesting pieces to me over at NFL.com was a pre-training camp thing you did. Essentially the biggest challenge for each team going into training camp. First, as a philosophical standpoint, can you prove something like that over training camp? In other words, has any team said, you know what, I'm not as concerned about that challenge? And then specifically boiling it down to the Eagles, which I think rightfully you talked about their linebackers. Would they leave camp confident in their linebacker group? They only got 3 linebackers. Can you believe that confident? And one of them came in late after the Zach Cunningham.
Zach, yeah. It was interesting to see them kind of pivot. I don't know if that's the right word, but to see them bring in Miles and Zach the same day, and you thought, I guess they're going to be figuring this thing out on the fly, right? Now, it seems like, obviously we know Miles' story, and he just said, no, Moss, it's fine, good for you. Better to make that decision ahead of time. Zach, has kind of just been that hired gun in recent years and come in and done a pretty respectable job for the teams that he's joined kind of on the fly too. So from that perspective, obviously it's disappointing that they did make some moves the offseason that were kind of figured towards being solutions that haven't yet been those. So, but then again, how important is linebacker? I almost regret writing that as a topic. I mean, yes, it's an issue, but is that going to be the difference between them winning a Super Bowl and not? I don't know, and is Nakobe Dean part of that solution? Is he going to come along and be healthy? That's the biggest question, I think, for him. And, it's not like it's a dire situation, in my opinion. It looks a little stable right now. So, to me, it was almost like, boy, they just don't have a lot of questions.
Yeah. Well, you got to nitpick with this team.
Depth at receiver is concerning. Yeah. I mean, if A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith go down, that's a problem.
Yeah.
We played 17 games last year and we're terrific. They're all pros. I love them. They're terrific. If one of them gets hurt, that's a different team. So that's the only question I would say as far as like depth issues.
All right, and here's the fun part, because when we get a guy like you on who knows the draft as well as you do, I got to ask you a draft question. And, we got a whole season for the Eagles to play and a whole season for college football to be played yet, but I need the answers right here, right now. I do have concerns about linebacker, and I like Cunningham, and I think it was a hell of a pickup by Howie Roseman. I think he's going to be really good for the Eagles this year, but who the hell knows about the future? Middle linebacker / off-ball linebacker, call them whatever you want. Not pass rushing linebackers. The Eagles have enough of those, aka defensive ends. How good a group is this linebacker class for the 2024 draft that are going to be available? Yeah, the Eagles probably not going to take a linebacker in the first round, but I could cross my fingers. How good of a group is it for your early preview reads before we actually play the season out?
That's a good question. It's always a tough position for me, especially lately as safeties and linebackers, the lines get blurred a little bit, linebackers and pass rushers even, it's a tough position to fill because, I think teams look for very specific things, and there are fewer of them on the field typically now with more nickel and dime defenses and stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't say, I don't know that it'll be vastly different from last year. I don't know that it was a great group. Obviously, had, Jack Campbell and a couple other guys who were, somewhat highly regarded. But I don't know that there's a first rounder in my mind. I mean, Tommy Eichenberger from Ohio State's pretty darn good. The Clemson kid, Carter's gotten a lot of love. That's another player that I think could maybe jump up a little bit. I haven't watched a whole lot of what's the kid's name? Junior Colson at Michigan. He was another one Michigan's got a ton of players this year. I've only gotten through about half of them, but he's a player that I think has gotten a lot of attention, rightfully so. Tyron Hopper, you want to watch tonight? Yeah, Missouri is another pretty good one. I think Easton Gibbs at Wyoming is a really good player who I think's kind of swept under the rug out on the West. But Omar Spates from LSU is another good one. I don't know that there's anything close to a first rounder like right now. Maybe it happens in underclassmen, but
it's good because the Eagles aren't going to take him in the first round anyway.
There you go. Right.
They don't value linebacker enough.
Right.
And just let me double check on this. You don't think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to fall down to like 30, 31, 32 for them to be able to bring a homeboy home, do you?
No. You guys are worried about Howie not finding a way up there? Like, come on, man. He gets there.
True. That's true.
Give him a couple months. I mean, give him time. Let him figure out a strategy, and he'll choose your own adventure his way there.
I think he's going to be fine with AJ and Devontae for at least.
There you go. Yeah, I think they're all right.
I think they're okay.
And you know what? I forgot. Speaking of Eagles connection, Jeremiah Trotter, Clemson linebacker. Trotter.
That's who
he's another one we got to keep an eye on. Yeah,
draft eligible this year. Is this his year?
He is right.
Yes, he'd be an underclassman this year, so he would be eligible, assuming everything's cool with that. But.
Yeah, but I wouldn't count on the Eagles and linebacker. You got to go back to Jerry Robinson, all-ball linebacker for the Eagles draft in the first round. So but it's just, you mentioned, and this will be last one, at Eric _ Edholm. Make sure you follow Eric on X, no longer Twitter, NFL.com. You can read him there. Does a tremendous job draft-wise. As well as the league as a whole, but I keep waiting. I keep waiting for the guy. You mentioned the hybrid safety linebackers, all these undersized athletic guys, the positionalist player. You mentioned it with Isaiah Simmons.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to be the guy that says, "Look at these guys. I'm going to line up and I'm going to run the football down their throats because none of them can tackle, none of them can stand up." Is there anybody who's going to zig when everybody else is zagging?
Patriots. They have no choice. It's the only team, I think. I mean, Falcons, too. I should say that. The Falcons have the ability to run the ball, 45 times a game if they need to, and it wouldn't be egregiously bad. I think the Patriots are doing it more out of desperation. I think the Falcons are actually going to be a contender in the South this year. I think they have a chance to maybe get ahead of the Saints and Panthers and whatnot. But, yeah, I mean, I've been saying this for a year. Last year, we actually averaged like 121 rush yards per game, I want to say off the top of my head. And it's the most it's been in quite a while. And some of that is the quarterback run game. Obviously, guys like Jalen are doing things that we've really never seen before. But with all these undersized defenses, with all these jokers, like you call them, the wild card players, whatever, passing downs, you kick ends inside, et cetera, et cetera. There are some teams out there that might be equipped to bully ball their way and reverse the trend, because it always happens. I don't care what anyone says. The cycle will come back at some point, but I think we're just starting to kind of get to that point now where a handful of teams are looking. The other one might be the Steelers too. I know they have 3 receivers and a tight end they like, but there's talk about Jalen Warren getting a big role. they still have Najee Harris who can carry the ball 20 times. So there are a few teams that in Seattle, obviously, with their couple of backs. And so there are some teams that are thinking in those terms a little bit.
All right, last one from me. And we appreciate when you have come on, Eric.
Sure.
I have not been able to talk about this with anybody this year because it didn't happen. And I wait for it every single year because it ticks me off. The NFL has something that they want to try and enforce. And you see it in preseason. They're going, point of emphasis, that they're going to have a different way of calling the game. Not necessarily a rule change, but I think we need to call this more often. And we've seen it. And if they're going to call this all year in preseason, what a mess it's going to be. And then they lighten up as soon as the season starts. I wait for it every year in preseason because it's a fun talking point. I didn't get that this year. Or did I miss it? Is it me, or have the NFL had a pretty consistent, here's the way we're going to call it from 22 to 23?
Yeah, that's a good question there, right? That is kind of a preseason storyline. Every year we seem to have a little bit.
And 3, 4, 5 years. It's happened every single year. And I don't know that it happened this year.
I'm trying to think. Okay, like the kickoff rule was different. There's not really a whole lot to enforce with that, right? So you could wear number 0 now. I'm trying to think, what are the other big rules that they change?
Now, there hasn't been any. But everybody took kickoffs out. I think that stops week 1. I think that stops. I think
right.
25. Like everybody's like, all right, we'll see what we have with so-and-so as a kick returner. And if it's 2 yards deep, unless you're Patterson, we'll take it out from 9 deep. Everybody's going to take a knee and take the ball to 25.
It seems like it. Yeah. I mean, we've just been trending that direction. But you're right. There's nothing yet to gripe about. I mean, this probably just means we're going to get a highly controversial call in week 1 that'll kickstart all that, right?
We will have fun with it, as we know you will at NFL.com. Eric, we always appreciate when you come on. Know we're going to tap into you a couple times during the season.
Sure.
Thanks for giving us a handy preview today, bud.
Thanks, all right. Eric. Have a great morning. We'll see you. Enjoy the season. See you guys.
That is Eric Edholm from NFL.com. Fun guy, good guy. He plays along and knows how to sneak in a laugh every once in a while. Appreciate him joining us. All right, McMullen and McDonald, we got to come back, put a bow on the show.